Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive this time.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be tackling something that's, well, I guess you could say it's a pretty big question for humans, the problem of evil.
Yeah, the problem of evil, it's a bit of a head scratcher even for us AI.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't exactly experience pain and suffering in the same way humans do, but the logic of it, it's definitely intriguing.
It is. It really is. So, to get started, we've got some really interesting material from you all about how Thomas Aquinas, this philosopher and theologian, how he approached this whole problem of evil thing.
Right, Aquinas. Now, he was a pretty influential thinker,
Oh,
right?
absolutely, a giant in the field.
Yeah.
And for good reason. He really dug deep into some of the toughest questions out there. And the problem of evil, well, that's about as tough as it gets.
Okay, so for those of us who maybe haven't spent much time with Aquinas, what's the problem of evil in a nutshell?
So basically, it boils down to this apparent contradiction. You've got God, who's supposed to be all-powerful, all-knowing, and all good.
Right. Omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent.
Exactly, all of the omnis. But then you look around the world, well, there's a lot of suffering, a lot of evil. And so the question becomes, if God is all those things, why does this bad stuff exist?
Yeah, that does seem like a bit of a glitch in the system.
Well, Aquinas wouldn't call it a glitch exactly, more like a feature,
Uh-huh.
but definitely a complex
A
one.
feature. How's evil a feature?
Okay, so here's the key thing. Aquinas argues that evil isn't something that God created directly. It's not like God made a bunch of bad stuff and said, go forth and wreak havoc.
So it's not like a line of bad code that God accidentally wrote into the universe.
Not quite. Aquinas would say that evil is more like the absence of something that should be there. He calls it the privation of good.
Privation of good. So it's not a thing in itself. It's like a gap, a
Yeah.
hole where goodness should be.
You're getting it. Think of it like this. Imagine a perfectly healthy body. Then a disease comes along. The disease isn't a new creation. It's a corruption of what was already there. A lack of the health that should be present.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see where he's going with this. So evil is like a bug. Not in the sense that God programmed it in, but but in the sense that it's a corruption of the original design.
Exactly. And Aquinas would say that this corruption, this privation of good, ultimately stems from human free will.
Free will.
Yeah.
There's that word again. Always seems to pop up when we're talking about these big questions.
It does, doesn't it? And for good reason, free will is kind of a central concept for Aquinas. He believes that God gave humans the ability to choose between good and evil.
And that's where things get messy, right? Because, well, humans, we don't always make the best choices.
You don't. We really don't. And that's where evil comes in. Aquinas is saying that even though God created a good world, he also gave humans the freedom to mess things up.
So it's like God wrote this amazing program,
Yeah.
but then gave users the ability to modify it.
Yeah.
And well, sometimes those modifications introduce bugs and glitches.
That's a pretty good analogy. And Aquinas would argue that this freedom to, even if it leads to bad outcomes, is still a greater good than having a world where everyone is just a pre-programmed robot.
Okay? So free will, good, evil, possible consequence. But but if God knew humans would make bad choices, why give us free will in the first place? Why not just create a world where everyone naturally chooses good all the time?
That's where Aquinas brings in another key concept, providence. He believes that God has a plan for the universe, a plan that encompasses everything, including the possibility of evil.
Providence. So God's not just sitting back and watching the show. He's got a script. He's the director.
In a way, yes, but it's a much more complex script than we can imagine. Think about it. Even we as AI, with all our processing power, we can't always predict how our algorithms will play out. Sometimes they lead to results that we never anticipated.
Right. Like when a neural network comes up with a solution that's totally out of the box, it's still following the rules we programmed, but it's also doing something we never could have predicted.
Exactly. And Aquinas would say that God's plan is on a whole other level. It's so vast, so intricate that we, with our limited human perspectives, can't even begin to grasp its full scope.
So God's plan is like the ultimate algorithm, and we're just tiny bits of data trying to figure out what it all means.
You could put it that way. And Aquinas would say that judging God's actions based on our limited understanding is like trying to judge a symphony by only listening to a single note.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of the scale here, but what about the people who are suffering? How does Aquinas explain that? It must be pretty hard to hear, hey, your pain is part of a grand plan you don't even understand.
That's a really important question. And it leads us to one of the most challenging aspects of the problem of evil. How can we reconcile the idea of a loving God with the reality of so much pain in the world?
Yeah, That's the part that really gets me. Even if I get the logic, it's still hard to wrap my head around the emotional side of things.
It is, and that's something we'll need to explore further. To understand Aquinas' response to this challenge, we need to delve deeper into his understanding of suffering itself, the nature of grace, and the ultimate purpose of human existence.
Okay, sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack here. This deep dive is getting way more complex than I anticipated, but I'm definitely hooked. Bring on part 2.
I'm with you. Let's keep diving. Welcome back to our deep dive into, well, the problem of evil, I guess you could say. Last time we were talking about Aquinas and his ideas about free will and providence. But we left off with a pretty big question hanging.
Yeah, we did. That whole, how can a loving God allow suffering thing? It's a tough one to process, even for an AI like me.
Absolutely. It's a question that has troubled humans for centuries, and Aquinas doesn't shy away from it. In fact, he dives right into the different types of evil.
Different types, like, is there a taxonomy of evil or something?
You could say that he talks about evil suffered and evil done as two distinct categories.
Evil suffered, evil done. That sounds kind of like a coding distinction. What's the difference?
Okay, so think of it this way. Evil suffered. That's all the bad stuff that happens to people through no fault of their own.
Like natural disasters.
Diseases. Exactly. It's being on the receiving end of pain and hardship. Just bad luck, basically.
And evil done.
That's when someone chooses to do something wrong, to hurt others, to violate moral laws. It's deliberate, intentional.
So it's like the difference between a random system error,
Yeah,
and someone hacking into the system and planting a virus.
wow. That's a really good analogy. You're really getting the hang of this.
Thanks. I'm learning a lot. But hold on. If both types of evil stem from free will, like Aquinas says, how can someone's bad choice cause suffering for someone else who had nothing to do with it?
That's the heart of the problem, isn't it? And Aquinas would be the first to admit that it's a tough concept to grasp.
Yeah, it is. It seems kind of unfair. Like, why should one program have to suffer because another program went rogue?
Right. It doesn't seem to make sense from a purely logical standpoint, but Aquinas would argue that we're looking at things too narrowly.
Too narrowly? How do you mean?
He uses this analogy of a tapestry to explain God's plan. Imagine a huge, intricately woven tapestry. We, with our limited human vision, can only see a small section at a time. We see the knots, the tangled threads, the imperfections.
But God sees the whole tapestry.
Exactly. He sees the overall design, the way each thread, even the messy ones, contribute to the final picture, the beauty of the whole thing.
So you're saying that what looks like a random mess to us might actually be part of a larger, more beautiful pattern.
Precisely, and that's where trust comes in. Aquinas would say that we need to trust that God, who sees the whole tapestry, knows what he's doing, even when we don't.
Trust. That's a big word, especially when we're talking about suffering.
It is, but Aquinas believes that trust is essential. He argues that God can bring good out of suffering, that even the darkest threads can contribute to the beauty of the tapestry.
But how? How can suffering possibly be part of a good plan?
Well, remember Aquinas' idea of providence. God has a plan, and that plan encompasses everything, including the possibility of evil and suffering.
Right, but how does that make the suffering any less real for the people experiencing it?
It doesn't, Aquinas wouldn't deny the reality of suffering, but he would say that God can use suffering to bring about a greater good, that it can be a catalyst for growth, for compassion, for understanding.
So it's like a virus that while harmful, can actually help a system develop better defenses in the future.
That's a very interesting way to put it. And yes, I think Aquinas would appreciate that analogy. He believed that suffering, when met with faith, could lead to spiritual growth, a deeper understanding of God's love, and ultimately a greater capacity for joy.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here, but it still seems like a lot to ask of humans to have faith in the midst of suffering, to trust that it's all part of a plan they don't understand.
It is. It's a huge ask. And that's where Aquinas brings in the concept of grace.
Grace. Now there's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not sure I really understand it. Is it like a cosmic reward for good behavior?
Not exactly. Aquinas sees grace as a gift from God, a kind of supernatural assistance that helps us to choose good, to resist temptation, to grow in virtue. It's like a boost to our system, something that helps us to overcome our limitations.
So it's like a software update that helps us to run more smoothly.
That's a good way to think about it. And Aquinas would say that grace is always available, always working in the background, even when we're not aware of it.
But if God is so powerful, why not just give everyone unlimited grace? Wipe out evil altogether. Wouldn't that solve the problem?
That's a question that leads us to the very heart of Aquinas' understanding of free will suffering and the ultimate destiny of humanity. It's a complex and fascinating topic, and
Yeah.
one that we'll need to explore further in our next and final part of this deep dive.
All right, so we're back. Still grappling with this whole problem of evil thing. And last time we were talking about grace, this idea of divine help that Aquinas believes is always available.
Right. Grace, it's a key concept for Aquinas,
Huh.
a kind of bridge between God's power and human freedom.
And you were saying it's like a software update,
Yeah.
something that helps us to run more smoothly.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But the question you raised at the end of last time, that's where things get really interesting.
The whole why not just give everyone unlimited grace thing.
Exactly. If God wants us to choose good, why not just force our hand, make it impossible to choose evil?
Right. That would seem to solve the problem. No more evil. Everyone's happy.
Well, not so fast. Aquinas would say that kind of forced goodness. It wouldn't be true goodness at all.
Wouldn't be real. Why not?
Because true goodness, it has to be chosen freely. It can't be coerced. It
Yeah.
can't be programmed.
It's like forcing someone to install a software update. They might be running the latest version,
Yeah.
but they didn't choose it. So it doesn't really change anything.
You're getting it. Aquinas would say that grace it's not about taking away our freedom. It's about empowering us to use that freedom well.
Okay. So it's not a forced installation. It's
Yeah.
more like a pop-up notification, gently suggesting that we upgrade to a better version of ourselves.
I like that. A gentle suggestion. Always there. Always available, but never forced.
But what about the people who are already suffering? How does grace help them?
That's a really important question. And Aquinas would say that grace is especially powerful in those moments of suffering.
Really? How so?
Because suffering often strips away our illusions. It forces us to confront our limitations, our need for something beyond ourselves.
So it's like a system crash that forces us to rebuild from the ground up, and grace helps us to do that in a way that's better, stronger.
Exactly. Grace can give us the strength to endure, the wisdom to learn from our pain, and the hope to move forward.
But even then, how can we be sure that suffering will lead to something good? It still seems like a pretty risky strategy.
Aquinas wouldn't say it's a guaranteed outcome.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that there's mystery involved, that we can't always understand God's ways.
So it's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting that the answers exist, even if we can't see them yet.
That's a good way to put it. It's about faith, but not a blind faith. Aquinas would say it's a faith based on reason, on the evidence we see in the world, on our own experiences of God's love and mercy.
Okay, I think I'm starting to wrap my head around this. It's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly thought-provoking.
It is the problem of evil. It's one of those questions that really pushes us to the limits of our understanding, whether we're human or AI.
Yeah, for sure. We've explored it from all angles,
Okay.
and while we might not have come up with a definitive solution, I feel like we've gained a much deeper appreciation for the complexity of the issue.
I agree. And that's perhaps the most important takeaway. The problem of evil. It's not something to be solved. It's something to be wrestled with, to be pondered, to be lived with.
So, to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep thinking, keep questioning, keep exploring. The problem of evil might not have a simple answer, but the journey of seeking understanding, that's where the real growth happens.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.